All right. Good evening. Welcome to MUFON Los Angeles. My name is Steve Murillo. I'm the State Section Director for MUFON LA. We've got a very, very intriguing and interesting program tonight. Dr. Bruce Goldberg, and he's going to be talking about time travelers, UFO abductors from our future. And I'm going to do the PowerPoint to introduce him. It's a little bit different. A little bit about Dr. Goldberg. First of all, he holds advanced degrees in both dentistry and counseling psychology. He conducts a thriving international hypnotherapy practice in Los Angeles, California, right here in our hometown, and specializes in reincarnation and time travel and consciousness raising. He's been inducted into the International Hypnosis Hall of Fame. So you guys be careful out there. He's written 21 books. I'd say he's written more books than that. He's a prodigious author. He's got them. They're available. Intriguing titles. And he's had dozens of articles published in scientific journals. He's appeared on Oprah, Sally, Regis, Tom Snyder, Jerry Springer, Jenny Jones, Montel, CNN, CBS News, and Coast to Coast AM. He's been on Coast to Coast over 60 times. Yeah.
Until I get it right.
Until he gets it right. His first book, Past Lives, Future Lives, was the first book ever written on guiding patients into future lives. His second book, The Search for Grace, was made into a television movie by CBS. And his recent book, Time Travelers from Our Future, is the first written on detailed cases of actual time travelers. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Bruce Goldberg.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for that kind introduction. Just one thing about the introduction. I was inducted, not abducted, into the Hypnosis Hall of Fame. Okay, first, does everybody here have, I just want to, okay. When you signed up here, when you came in, everybody should have a brochure and one of these little, can you hear me? Can't hear you. I can't hear me either. Can we, put some juice on here? How's this? Better? Okay. Don't be shy. If you have any problems, just bring it up back here, okay? Okay. Everybody should have a brochure and one of these little packets here. If you don't have it, just raise your hand and one of our exotic assistants here will help you. This will help you understand what we're doing. Okay, I want to first, it's a pleasure to be here. I've reincarnated to this group. About 10 years ago, I was in beautiful downtown Burbank doing a talk on time travelers, and this one is a more updated talk. I just want to give a little first background as to who I am as far as how I got involved. As you know, I have a dental degree, so you might say I retired from dentistry over 20 years ago, so now I drill into the past and future, okay? And even before I was a dentist, when I was in dental school, I developed a hypnotherapy practice and started doing things like past life regression. That was back in the 70s, you know, disco times, you know, Polyester City, you know. And from that, I discovered the concept of taking people into the future, progression, into future lives, which led to my first book on past lives, future lives, the first book ever written on taking people into future lifetimes. I developed that field. And then that led to out-of-body experiences and fifth-dimensional travel, which is a major part of my work today, as you coast-to-coast listeners would know. And then I worked with UFO abductees. So now we're talking about MUFONish here, okay? And that I thought was going to be, you know, pretty much the extent of the practice, except in the early 90s, I started dealing with people who were abducted by time travelers from our future, chrononauts, as I call them. So that led to where I am today. I do deal with the other aspects in my practice in Woodland Hills. I do deal with taking people into past and future lives and out-of-body travel and things like that too, of course. But the time travelers is a unique concept. I don't know why, but to me, I don't know of anyone on this planet that has actual real cases of time travel step by step. I've worked with probably over 300 or 400 of them now. And I've also communicated with them. And in fact, I just want to introduce a couple of items here. People have asked me what is relevant to the talk tonight. Well, it's a talk on time travelers. So when you see a title of a book called Time Travelers from Our Future, you can kind of get the hint. There's another book called Egypt, an Extraterrestrial and Time Traveler Experiment. That was my second book on time travelers. For those of you that are coast-to-coast listeners, Art Bell reviewed my time travelers book, and his quote was, "A remarkable book, wow." That's from Art. George Norrie reviewed the Egypt book, and he said, "A must-read." George Norrie, Coast to Coast AM. And Exploring the Fifth Dimension is my actually most recent book. Those of you that are Coast listeners know that I talk about it a lot when I'm on the show. It's about things like out-of-body experiences and teleportation, and it also deals with parallel universes and a whole bunch of other fun stuff. Highly recommended, George Norrie, Coast to Coast. So these three books are the most relevant tonight. And those of you that actually want to experience, not just, talk is cheap, you want to experience what I'm talking about, want to go out of the body, want to meet a time traveler, or some of the more positive ETs that are out there, like the Pleiadians and some of the more gatekeepers that are actually here for our best interests. There's a CD album called Time Traveler Training Program, which guides you step by step out of the body into the fifth dimension, and you can experience everything I'm talking about tonight. So that's for your own dining and entertainment, as we say. Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about time travelers. First, I want to introduce the concept. We're going to show some a PowerPoint presentation of 8 different figures here, and then we're going to see an actual example of a UFO abductee that I work with on Fox Television. They were kind enough to film it. And then you're going to see and hear a woman who actually made a contact with a time traveler from the 36th century. So let's talk about these dudes. Okay, now, first, when you deal with time travelers, you have to understand we're dealing with extraterrestrial as well as actual human types. All right? So to begin with, we're going to have what I call the Steve Spielberg ET, the Gray. Now, in the future, beginning with the 25th century, you're going to have Greys making regular communication with our planet, and they're not going to be killed by the Men in Black. So you might say they're not extraterrestrials anymore. They have their Gray card. All right. There was a Republican debate tonight. I had to throw that in about immigration. Okay. These are 3 to 5 feet tall. They have no body hair, not much of a nose, and the whole routine. And they are the actual, interestingly enough, if you were to see a Gray today, you would assume, assuming they're from the current century, that they're far more intellectually superior to us, because how did they get here from 26 light years away? Well, in the future, they become the gophers of a time traveler team. They do the lowest level procedures. All right? Okay, so those are the Grays. They come in blues and whites as well as the Grays, so they're not just gray. The second member of a time traveler team is what we call the hybrids. These are half human and half extraterrestrial, usually Grays, sometimes other extraterrestrial groupings. And they're about 5 to 6 feet tall. Their skin is white to kind of bronzes in color. They look like the Speaker of the House, at times. And they come from the same county, I think, too. And they look pretty human, except the forehead you can see is a little weird, and their eyes are a bit faceted. So the closer you get to a hybrid, the closer you realize you're not in Kansas anymore. And they represent a little bit more advanced levels of a time traveler team. They will monitor the genetic productions that are done from the sperm and egg samples or whatever. So they're a little higher up. Now, the head of a time traveler team, interestingly enough, is a pure human. Okay? These are all chrononauts. Chrononauts means time travelers. The pure human, this guy looks like a Malibu surfing dude. He's actually, this is Traxa, who we'll talk about in a moment in detail. Traxa is actually 76 years young when this was this artistic depiction was made. They live to be between 500 and 900 years old in the future. So, you women out there, you don't have to go Botox, okay? So the pure human is usually 6 to 7 feet tall. They're clean-shaven. They have nice crystal clear blue eyes. They're Caucasian. I'll show you why the race is an issue. It's not a real issue to them. It's only to us. And they always wear white suits, and they're always the head of the team. Now, why are people have asked me, coast-to-coast listeners and other people who read my books, they say, "Doctor, are you some sort of racist?" It's not me, folks. The reason why most of them are Caucasian is because when they have the other races and they send them back in time, they get killed. So it doesn't take a lot of rocket science, chrononauts, rocket scientists, to realize that you don't send the people out if they're going to get killed. You send the ones out that are going to come back and report to the future. So that's why the majority of the pure humans tend to be Caucasian. Now, the reptilians, as you can see, are the ugliest people you'll ever run into, okay? They ain't got no alibi, as we say. They are not part of a time traveler team. They are cannibalistic, they're nasty, they have vertical pupils, they're about 6 to 8 feet tall, they weigh about 200 to 300 pounds at times, depending on how much carbs they eat. They're nasty, and they're not members of a team. When they come back in time, it's because they have running away from the cops in the future, okay? You won't find a lot of reports about reptilians. Oh, I'm sure you'll read the literature. There's not much written about them because they tend to eat their mistakes. They really are nasty. So they're not members of a team. I only mention them because in the future, they don't have wings. They're not the Draco types. And the current reptilians, of course, have wings for the most part, if you know the literature. But they don't. All right? Okay, so they're all bad news. Okay, if we can have the next slide now, the next figure. Now, there are certain principles. Can we... go ahead to figure 2. Oh, actually, I am? Oh, I just do this like that? Oh, there you go. See? Okay. One comment before we go on. I mentioned that pure human I showed you is Traxxer. He's on the cover of the Time Travelers from Our Future book. When time travelers come back to our century or any century beyond or before theirs, they adopt a name of their mission. So Traxxer, when I met him, I actually met him in the 5th dimension, as well as after receiving reports of many of my patients who met him first, okay? So I'm just confirming the research. So I said, what's your name? And he says, my name is Traxxer. And I said, could you spell it? And he says, T-R-A-K-S-A. So I said, so what's the significance of your name, since your name represents a mission? He said, well, Dr. Goldberg, you are well known in the future. It's nice to have a fan club. And he says, so I'm here to help you in your career. And this is back in the early 90s. And I said, really? He said, so if you spell my name backwards, it says Ask Art. And it was his purpose to introduce me to Art Bell, which he did at the end of 1993. January 2nd of 94 was my first coast-to-coast interview, and now it's about 70 interviews later. And now I deal with George, of course, my good buddy George. But the point is that so it's nice to have a reputation. Okay, so some of the principles about time travel. These materials are in the Time Travelers from Our Future book. They can induce a state of suspended animation if they don't want to be seen, or if there's the Men in Black mentality, or if they're working with someone but somebody else that happens to be in the room, they can do that, just like current ETs can. They master hyperspace travel, which is the 5th dimension, and they can move through walls and solid objects. And we're going to see an example of how an abduction can be done in a New York City apartment with nobody knowing what's going on, and we'll see that shortly. They can levitate themselves at will. They travel in the 5th dimension, so they're functioning at a frequency vibrational rate beyond ours. Therefore, you can't see them unless they lower their frequency vibrational rate and come down to the Earth plane with us. Now, why would they do that? They won't for the most part, because the Men in Black will take them out. Yes, there are Men in Black in this century, and there are Men in Black in the future. And we all know who Men in Black are, okay? Will Smith is not one of them. Okay. And they don't have little Yoda dogs either. Okay. Now, the other thing is that these chrononauts generate from 1,000 to 3,000 years in the future. Time travel will be discovered by a man named Tatos, T-A-A-T-O-S. He will discover it in the year approximately 3050. So everybody who tells you about time machines they have right now, they're watching old movies, and they're a little high, because we're not going to develop time travel for 1,000 years. We need exotic matter, and we need a wormhole linear accelerator, which we do not have, and we're not going to have until the year 3050. Anybody who makes any of those claims, I'll be more than happy to see them in my office with my boxing gloves on. Tatos develops this time travel, and first he experimented by sending images back in time. Now, those of you that are familiar with the Greek and Roman literature, I'm sure it's part of your bedtime reading, you'll know that the Greek oracles would see these images, and they didn't understand what they were, but they tried to interpret them. Those actually came from the future. Later on, they sent objects back in time, and we're going to show an example of some of the forbidden archaeology to show you where that comes from. And eventually, they sent Tatos that said, I'm going back in time. I'm doing it. So he did. And after he mastered it, he was a brilliant person. He was like the Da Vinci of the future. This guy was an artist, philosopher, physician, biochemist, physicist, you name it. He did everything. Okay, so when he comes back in time, the government, of course, wasn't thrilled with him being a volunteer because he was such a brilliant dude, but it worked. Then he assembled a team. The first team of time travelers, around 3,050 give or take, consisted of Tatos, now listen to the names, Geb, Isis, Osiris, and Horus. Ring a bell? Those were gods in ancient Egypt. They really were time travelers. Tatos is also in the ancient Egyptian literature, except they called him Thoth, or they called him Tatos. God of wisdom. Greeks called him Asclepius, the god of medicine, because he was a real doctor, the whole routine. Okay, so so in other words, a lot of what we get here today is really coming from the future, not from the past. Some of it from ET contact, from the current, yes, but a lot of it's from the future. Okay, other things. Now, in the year 3050, to the end of the 34th century, the way they come back in time is by doing something called the Wormhole Linear Accelerator. We'll get to that in a moment. When you do that, you have tears in the fabric of space-time. You create problems, which is why we have a lot of weather problems and why fish fall from the sky sometimes. You know how they can't explain that? And there's a lot of other anomalies that occur. By the 35th century, you're going to have teleportation being the mode of time travel. Traxa is an example of a 36th century time traveler, so he comes back by the big T word for teleportation. Okay, now the purpose of these time travelers is actually for our spiritual growth. Why? You say, why is this? It sounds like, Malibu or Venice Beach, right? The reason why they're here for our spiritual growth is because they're us in the future, and the less we screw up this planet, the better off it is for the future. So they actually have a vested self-interest in helping us. Now here, if you look at the top part of this little diagram, this is a wormhole. This is the principle behind a wormhole linear accelerator. You've got a black hole, comes out as a white hole, you got a bridge, a wormhole in between, and if you can, these are basically microscopic in size, with wormholes all over the universe, but we can't see them. But if you were to enlarge them, and I'll show you how physically that is quite possible, not now, but it will be, and then you can line it with exotic matter, which has negative mass, which is what superconductors are trying to create. Nice try, folks, but it's not going to happen for 1,000 years. Then you can actually create a wormhole linear accelerator. Now you say, well, this sounds like a science fiction project, and this sounds like Bill Shatner should be here. I understand that, but I want to read a scientific, a real hard-nosed dude, his experiments. Carl Sagan, the late Carl Sagan, when he wrote his novel Contact, Jodie Foster movie, remember that? His good friend was Kip Thorne at Caltech in Pasadena. Kip Thorne is the one who outdebated Stephen Hawking about the existence of black holes. He won a big bet. He's a really bright guy. Well, he wrote an article in the Physical Review Letters, which is a very technical physics journal, back in 1988, September of 88. And it's a very complicated article, but what he was doing was using a mathematical model for Carl Sagan, as a favor to Carl, to show him, is time travel possible? And this is what a couple of quotes from the article. Remember, this is a scientific article of guys with real thick glasses, okay? Quote 1. One can imagine an advanced civilization pulling a wormhole out of the quantum foam and enlarging it to classical size. All right? And there's the math to show that. I'm not going to show you the math, but go to Caltech and we can talk, all right? Number 2, from a single wormhole, an infinitely advanced civilization can make a time machine. Can anybody here actually imagine what life is going to be like in 1,000 years? We don't know what's going to happen in 5 years or 2 years. iPhone part 99, Quote 3, if the laws of physics permit traversable wormholes, then they probably also permit such a wormhole to be transformed into a time machine. That's Kip Thorne, all right? Now, this article came out 23 years ago. It's been challenged by authors and by, the usual yada yada fights in the scientific community. It's held. You can't knock the math. If the math is there, it works. So that's an example of how time travel will actually initially be discovered. Remember, time machines, traversable wormholes, wormhole linear accelerators cause tears in the fabric of space-time. Teleportation doesn't. Using hypnosis to access the fifth dimension, which I train people to do, that doesn't either. So it's a very safe way to sort of like, like clean energy. I like to think of it that way, okay? This is California. Okay. Now if we can move on. Okay, now, people ask me, they say, one of the big problems about the Pyramid of Giza, it's one of my, in my Egypt book, I go into great detail on this. One of the great wars that fits in the scientific community, how was the Pyramid of Giza built? Well, there was a historian back around, Diodorus, back around, 2,000 years ago, talking about how there was 100,000 slaves that worked for 20 years. You ever hear that, right? Or Charlton Heston in the movie 10 Commandments, right? Well, guess what? No, it didn't happen. We know that because there's only about 3,000 hut remnants that were found in the Giza Basin. 3,000 huts is about 3,000 people. Where's your 100,000? All right. How do they build them? How do they move these humongous boulders, 70 tons? Yeah, it's a joke. Was it by manpower? No. Was it by levees or some sort of Rube Goldberg apparatus? No. We know that because the Japanese tried to do the Pyramid of Giza mentality in 1978 or so, in the late 70s, and they failed using technology they thought was relevant 4,500 years ago. Then they said, to heck with it, let's use modern cranes, and they still failed. How did they do that? This is how we did it, or they did it. It's called the anti-gravity flying craft. This pyramidal-shaped device is about 9 feet long, and you can see you've got anti-gravity generators here, here, and here. You've got an air cushion. This blows air down, so it doesn't have to worry about a motor, per se. And you've got lights along here, so they can work at night. This is the underside. Now, if you go to the top, you're going to see lights along the side here. You're going to see 2 cockpits, usually driven by who? The Grays, the Gophers, on their way to Dunkin' Donuts to get coffee. Okay? And then if you notice, there's a triangular-shaped design. This is very relevant. If you ever see a craft or you ever hear of anything that mentions a triangular-shaped design, whether it's an image on their Star Trek shirt or whether it's a vehicle, that's the future, folks. It's always representing the future. That's their symbol. Whether it has an eye in it or any kind of design is up to them. But triangular-shaped designs means it's from the future. Okay, so this anti-gravity flying craft is how you explain Stonehenge, the Pyramid of Giza, the Easter Island, all the megaliths that are around Europe and South America and wherever. This is the only way you can explain the way the boulders were moved. And by the way, the Pyramid of Giza was not built in 2500 BC with Chephren. That's a joke. It actually began about 10,500 BC. And the Egypt book will detail the origin of it, as well as the Sphinx. So this is the anti-gravity flying craft. I don't know anyone else who talks about that. It works on an annihilation reaction. It's a very brilliant craft. And the larger crafts that brought these time travelers back in time were also used to move objects around. But these crafts were more surgical. When you wanted to place a boulder within a 1/4 inch accuracy, which is the Pyramid of Giza, you got to use the surgical devices. It's like using a scalpel blade in surgery. Okay, now, focus more on the lower part of this. This is the Temple of Abydos, which is about 300 miles south of Cairo. And this is a hieroglyphic that's been dated back to the Ptolemy era. The Ptolemy era is about 300 BC to about 30 BC, ending with the Cleopatra. That's when Alexander the Great died, and the Ptolemies inherited Egypt as part of their, investment property, okay? And, okay, so this has been dated. There's no argument that this is at least 2,000 years old. Some say 2,300. Now, this is a real hieroglyphic. Now, when I look at this, I was on Coast to Coast a couple of years ago discussing this, if you remember it. And I said, look at this. This is a helicopter, okay? Look at this. This is a UFO craft. Here's another UFO craft. And here is a stealth jet. So one of the callers said to me and said, I think this is really just hieroglyphics trying to advise somebody what? To bring the wheat home for Christmas? I mean, this is pretty obvious. And I understand a little bit of hieroglyphics. There's no hieroglyphic for a UFO that stands for the letter Q, okay? It doesn't work that way. This is Abydos. Very impressive. Now we're going to deal with another, this is my favorite one. This is Dendora. Dendora is, in the Cairo area today. This is the lower crypt, number 17, those of you that like numbers. And this, again, dates back to the Ptolemy era again, 300 BC to 30 BC. And what you have here is an example of Egyptian electricity. Now I'm going to go into details with this. This is a real, absolute, it's not a hieroglyphic, it's a wall carving, actually, in the Dendora, in the bottom level of the temple. Now, what you have here, you notice these big tubes, okay? And you notice that there are braided cables. Now, any electrical engineer will tell you, you only have braided cables for electricity. You don't have it because you're braiding your hair in a hair salon, getting ready for a Friday date, okay? These are braided cables, electricity. We know the Egyptians understood electricity because they electroplated their vases. We understand that and the only way you can build a pyramid of Giza, you have to have lighting, because as you're sealing up the pyramid, it's pitch black. And you can't use sunlight, you can't use mirrors, it doesn't work, they've tried it. The only way to do it, and there's no candles because there's no soot on the walls. If you use candles to use internal lighting, which has been done forever, you're going to have soot, hydrocarbons on the walls of the temple or the pyramid. Guess what? Nada, okay? So therefore, they did not use torches. They only used some sort of electrical lighting. Now, what you have here are two technicians, okay, two guys, two Egyptians, and these big tubes, and you notice the braided cable. Now, this represents Horus, and this represents an energy source above his head. This is actually a Van de Graaff generator. This is a Crookes Tube. What does a Crookes Tube remind you of? It's a primitive television set, folks. These two technicians, if you look carefully, you see they have like a headset on and like glasses or something to hide their eyes. Maybe a producer is giving them signals. We go to commercial in 5, you know? Okay, here is an experiment going on. You got a baboon with a knife. And by the way, the Egyptians did train baboons. They called them politicians in those days. And the baboon is using a knife. And you notice how the snake, the serpent, is turning its head backwards as if it was shocked by an electrical shock. This serpent is the opposite, is everything is fine. So this is actually a scientific experiment. All right, if you look at everything here between the producer and his headsets, between the Crookes Tubes, primitive television set, between the Van de Graaff generator, between the braided cables, you have electricity on the conservative level. On the more extreme level, you have television in ancient Egypt. I realize my antagonists are not going to believe this until they see a TV guide in hieroglyphics. But folks, this is very interesting. Okay, let's move on. All right. Okay. Now, when a person is abducted, now understand, when time travelers do abductions, it's not the same as an ET today doing an abduction. They do it for our spiritual growth. And when they take you on a ship or an underground military installation, so now we have the conspiracy aspect, which I detail intimately in my time traveler book and the Egypt book, what they will do is they will show you a hologram, almost like AKA Star Wars, all right? They will show you a hologram of a past life scene. They actually trace you in past lives. They'll trace the same individual lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. And they'll educate you. They'll show you, for example, this guy is looking at horse and buggy is probably a 100 to 150-year-old scene in some city. It could be Chicago or whatever. And this individual is sitting in this room. It's going to be in a conference kind of room aboard a ship or in an underground military installation. And that's how they do this. They can actually show you holograms of your past lives. They have the technology, which we'll review in a moment. Let me give you an example of a past life connection. Okay, so a woman, I call her Wendy in my Time Travels from Our Future book. She's abducted, and she comes to me after being abducted maybe a dozen times in a period of a year. She goes, "Doctor, I don't know what's going on, but this has got to stop. I don't know what's happening here." So I trained her how to get memories of the abduction, and she does. And in between sessions, you understand, I see her on a Monday, and by Thursday, she's abducted, all right? And then she comes back and tells me what happened. I said, "So tell me, what was the abduction like?" She goes, "Well, I was on this ship, and I was being shown holograms of my past lives. And in every one of my past lives, I was either beaten up, murdered, abandoned, and I was depressed." And, of course, she came to me with depression and overeating issues today. And I said, "So what was the, who was showing you this?" She goes, "Well, it was a guy. He was a really good-looking guy, blonde, tall, 6.5 feet tall, blonde hair, and wearing a white robe." And I said, "And how did he communicate with you?" And she told me, of course, the answer is telepathically. Okay. Now, I said, "So what's going on?" As she's going through all these abductions, she's telling me that as she's showing him one after another, one humongously negative scene after another, he's getting very emotional. He's almost crying. And I said, "Really? So I want you to have a little tete-a-tete with your time traveler," who, by the way, was from the 33rd century. You'll see why that's relevant in a moment. And I said, "The next time you see him, I'm sure you're going to be abducted again. Don't worry about it. This is going to be okay. I want you to ask him why he's so emotionally involved. He's not supposed to be." So she says, "Can I do that?" And I said, "Yeah, you can, okay. Do it telepathically, okay? Even if you have laryngitis, it'll work." So she does, and he says, "The reason why I'm speaking as him now, I am not him, regardless of what people coast to coast think. I am not from the 33rd century. I said that, so he said, the reason why I'm so personally involved and so emotionally involved is because you are my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. Yes, grandmother. So they do work with their ancestors, they can. And they trace them in past lives and into the future. So now, at the same time, at the very end of this session, by the way, Wendy was able to overcome her depression and her eating situation. And now he's told her at the very end, this occurred in 1994, it was around June. He said, now, I want you to know that in the near future, about a year and a half from now, you're going to meet a man named Frank, and he's going to have red hair, and he's going to drive a white Corvette, and he's going to be a very significant person in your life. And that's all I'm going to say about it. So she says, okay, I'm not dating anyone now. It's okay. All right. So we fast forward a year and a half to the end of Christmas of 95. Wendy calls me and says, Doctor, I want you to know that I met Frank. He's got red hair and a white Corvette, and we're engaged. And I said, great. Now, the following year, a year and a half later, she calls me up again and says, Doctor, I want you to know that I just gave birth to a baby boy. And I said, and guess what? In about, 1,200 years, you're going to have a time traveler at Thanksgiving dinner. Okay. Karmic family values is like I like to think of it. Okay. Now, how does an abduction occur in New York City? You've read some of the books that talk about abductions in major cities and apartment buildings or places where people don't report UFO. They can actually abduct you through the fifth dimension. Remember we talked about wormhole linear accelerators? You can create a tear in the fabric of space-time. This can be a wormhole. The ETs, in this case the Greys, this is an adolescent girl. You notice how adolescents are very often abducted. Can come through the wall of the apartment building. Nobody sees a craft. The craft could be miles and miles away. It could be or it could be from a military base because there is a conspiracy aspect. And the abduction can be done. And that's how you can abduct somebody without having a UFO observation or sighting in that particular city. So there's an example of how fifth dimensional abductions can occur. Not inductions, abductions, okay? Okay. Now, one thing I want to mention here too is that Traxa, I want to get back to Traxa for a moment, because Traxa is kind of an interesting dude. He was the one I told you, the first time traveler that I had any communication with. And Traxa was telling me a cute story. He likes to play intellectual games, as the time travelers all want to do. What I mean by that is that back in Chicago, this is about 10 years ago, 10 years ago, Traxa went to a scientific meeting in Chicago. A bunch of physicists were there, and he was just attending it and kind of like trying to influence a little bit, because the time travelers do give us our technology, regardless of what the government tells you. If you think the Bell Laboratory is responsible for all our whatever, or Microsoft or whatever, that's all fine. But time travelers can actually interact with us in our dream levels at night. They can give us our insights, so, you know, it does work. Anyway, so he was at a scientific meeting, and when remember, this guy is teleportation, is how he goes back to his either home base or a craft or any place or a military installation. So at the end of the meeting, he sees a guy kind of like in the hallway of this big, like think of like a big, like a university main administration building as an example, because it probably wasn't a university. And he sees a guy kind of looking at him. So Traxa, because he's got this device, which we'll talk about in a moment, how you can actually push a button on your belt and teleport, he dematerializes right in front of the guy and goes back to his base, whether it's his ship or his underground base. And the guy, and then he has to come back in a few minutes, so then he rematerializes, not with like, you know, sparkling like Star Trek. It doesn't work that way, okay? And so the guy sees him. He says, what the hey? So Traxa then leaves the building. He doesn't dematerialize, doesn't teleport. He walks out of the building. The guy happens to be a private investigator, a PI, and he follows him. He says, I don't know what's going on, but I want a piece of this action. I want to see who this guy is. Traxa goes to a coffee shop a couple of miles down the road to have a cup of coffee, and the private eye, of course, follows him. He knows that, okay? So when Traxa leaves the diner, the private eye bribes the waitress, takes his cup and his, you know, saucer there, checking for fingerprints, of course, and Traxa knows he's going to do that, and Traxa teleports back to his base. The private eye runs the fingerprints through the local database and through the FBI base, and guess what he finds out? Nothing! Because he's not going to be around for 15 to 1,600 years, okay? So Traxa thought that was cute. And so did I. Okay, so you see, never screw around with the time travel. All right, let's talk about some technology here. Before we go on to see an actual depiction of what abductions look like, not only ET abductions, but also, and as well as fifth-dimensional travel, but also a time traveler contactee. There are a couple of devices I want to review. One is the Wormhole Linear Accelerator, also known as the WLA. This enlarges a wormhole to permit time travel. It's used from about 3050 AD to the end of the 34th century. The problem with it is that it causes tears in the fabric of space-time. Yes, you can take a microscopic today wormhole, enlarge it so that a craft can go through it, and it can travel back in time. And that will be the time travel mode for about 300 years. The next device is called the Morphogenic Cell Regulator, or the MCR. It renders a time traveler invisible on this three-dimensional world, as I talk about. Their frequency vibrational rate is increased or accelerated so that you can't see them. And it also alters one's physical appearance, and even the DNA and fingerprints can be changed so that if somebody was tracing a time traveler, they could make themselves to be whatever they want, almost like shape-shifting. Okay? So morphogenic cell regulator. Now, the SAD device is also called the suspended animation device. We talked about this briefly. It projects a luminous red ball of light that places people in suspended animation, and it freezes all events around them. In other words, everything is frozen. It's like a time zone. It's like just an example of you just in the middle of the space-time continuum. This is something that you can't possibly relate to, as if time stopped. They can do that for about 15 minutes. A teleporting device looks like a little transistor radio on your belt. You push a button and you teleport anywhere you want in time, back or forward. You can even go to parallel universes too. The Intergalactic Line Healer is a very interesting device. It looks like a pen flashlight, like I have this little pointer here. It's about this dimension, little pen flashlight. And it uses the principles of quantum medicine, so that if a time traveler uses his intergalactic line healer, on you when you had a cancer or some incurable disease, you would heal. You would all of a sudden become normal again. The disease would disappear. And there's a case I report in my Time Travels from Our Future book about a man who, a woman's in the hospital for pancreatic cancer. That's a pretty high mortality rate. But she's basically going to die. So she's in the hospital. The oncologist comes in and says, we're going to release you in a few hours, and we want you to go on a cruise, get your will together, because you got about maybe 6 months. And sorry, man, but there's nothing we can do. And she says, I understand. So before she leaves, a young intern, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, real tall, hint, hint, comes in, and she says, who are you? You're kind of young. What are you, like a medical student? She goes, well, I'm an intern here, and I'm supposed to do a little quickie exam with you, so if you just want to take a moment. She goes, all right. So he takes a pen flashlight, shines it up and down her abdomen a couple of times, looks at her in the eye and, does a couple of things, and then leaves. Well, she goes home, and she feels pretty good, and then about 3 months later, she's supposed to report back to the hospital for some final tests, and they said, you got to come back again. She goes, well, why? She goes, well, we have a problem here. Your tests show that you no longer have pancreatic cancer, and that's impossible. So she goes, well, okay, I'll come back one more time, but I feel really good. So she comes back, and they do the test, and they do the test again, and they find out the cancer is gone. So this wasn't an angel, although time travelers can act like it, but they can actually, quantum medicine is very brilliant. Quantum medicine can also regenerate a lost limb, and it could also resuscitate a human being who's dead if they catch you within 24 hours. They can reanimate you. Okay? So this is pretty heavy stuff. All right? So that's the idea of technology from the future. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is show a little video clip. We're going to see 2 clips. The first one is going to be your standard UFO abduction, except there's also going to be a lot of out-of-body experience associated with this and some remote viewing associated with this. And then the second clip is going to show a time traveler abductee. So if we can roll the tape, Maestro.
One night I was sleeping and I was awakened to see 2 heads sticking through a window, and I thought to myself, you can't stick your head through a closed window. So at that point in time, I began sleeping under the covers, and eventually what led to my mom would wake me up and ask me why I'm sleeping under the bed, so they can't see me, you know. And she, what do you think a 6-year-old kid's talking about? But, you know, some imaginary forces in the closet or something, or, you know, whatever the case may be.
And eventually you were taken?
As I understand it, you know, we've been there a few times. I've had other family members indicate that they've watched as this occurred. Although they're not a part of it, they were a third party to the event taking place.
Is this a repressed memory, or do you have full recollection of what happened?
They're definitely repressed memories. The only clear memory I have is the first time, as I understand it, and the last time that I can remember something happening, I woke up at about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, aware of what I thought to be an intruder in my room, and went to handle it. And when I went to move, I got halfway through my motion and could not move.
Take the story further. What happened?
Well, at that point in time, one of the individuals began to speak to me, and it was a little confusing because I realized that the sound was within my head and not within my ears. It was the strangest voice or vocalization, if you will, that I've ever heard, because it didn't sound like you and I speaking. Now, as my brother was struck twice by an individual, he went into the hospital, was in a coma for 5 days, and eventually died. The moment of his death was one I clearly remember because I was laying in bed thinking about it, and he walked into the room and put his right hand on my hip, his left hand on my right shoulder, and said, "I've got to go, you've got to let me go. Goodbye." And I immediately sat up, got dressed. I was at the hospital within 7 minutes, and they couldn't understand why I already knew he was dead.
And for people who can't quite understand that, how do you differentiate that from a dream or...
For somebody else's satisfaction, you can't. It's a reality. It is a reality to me, just as a fear you may have is a reality to you that may not be to me.
But it all physically happened.
Oh, it physically happened. I sleep on a waterbed. When he walked in and put his hand on my hip, my body sank into the waterbed, and that's what brought me to attention. And I went to sit up, and he put his hand on my shoulder to keep me laying down.
And what were you, have the sessions with Dr. Goldberg helped you to sort of put this together, these experiences? Or?
Well, it solidified what I knew to be the case with regard to what I call visitation as opposed to abduction. I mean, there are things that you know and that are inside of you that bother you or you think about, or it's just constantly there, and it's nice to have a third party go, "You know what you're talking about?" "Yeah, I do."
How far away have you ever been? I mean, is a meter about as far away as you...
No.
How
The
far?
other side of the United States.
And
I went looking for a friend who I missed very dearly, and this individual was at school back east, very prominent university, and I had seen photographs of his room and things of that nature, and you know, we were really close throughout high school, so I consciously went there and looked around the room and made some comments to him, and before I left I said, "Call me when you wake up." And the next morning I got a really strange telephone call. He goes, "What the hell were you doing last night?" I go, "What are those pipes in the room? Those pipes weren't there before. Why is the stereo on the wrong side of the room?" And his response was, "I just moved last week." And I didn't know that he had moved.
another perhaps dumb question, but to get to the other side of the United States, are you aware of
No.
that?
You're
it's
just there.
You're
there.
just there.
You're there.
Craig, could you relate the out-of-body experience to the reincarnation and to dealing with your brother and your father's death as a big picture?
Well, the big picture is that this is just a small picture here. This is it's just a school as far as I'm concerned. It's just a class. I have dreams where I'm with my brother and my father, and we'll be standing in streams fishing. And he and I have ongoing conversations, but my father is always a distant from me, and he will never turn around. And Craig explains to me that he's still embarrassed.
What's he embarrassed about?
Suicide.
Still embarrassed about the way he left.
But it's a big picture. I know that I'll be, I know that there's so much more than this, and this is just a little bit of what truly is going on. You know, it's like giving somebody one choice.
People here that you've been working with before the show, but you said you can also take people into their future. You can.
Okay. Okay. Now, with Kurt's case, He had experience of visitation, of course, the ETs ever since he was a child. And that was one thing. But at the same time, as a result of these experiences, he became more gifted psychically, if you want to use that term. He was able to do the remote viewing. He was able to travel across the country, documented by recognizing the furniture of his friend's university or his dormitory room, which, of course, he's never been to. His brother, he was also be able to sense physically his departed brother who died on a motorcycle accident. So now we've got contact with a astral soul, so to speak, an astral body and a spiritual body, his own experiences out of the body, conscious memories of those experiences. So this is pretty heavy stuff. He's growing spiritually. And again, dealing with his father's suicide, obviously there's a lot of emotional and other energy things going on here. But my point is that these experiences are very natural and very therapeutic. When we go to sleep at night, whether you like it or not or know it or not, you go through a REM cycle, a dream cycle, for 3 hours a night. That's standard physiology, neurophysiology. And when you're dreaming, guess what? You're in alpha brainwave, which is hypnosis, and you're out of the body. UCLA and other laboratories have shown by very interesting controlled experiments that when you dream, you're out of the body. Most of the time, you go to the lower astral plane. That's when you're going to get attacked by Darth Vader and Dick Cheney. So, not good. You can protect yourself from that. One of my books back there was called Protected by the Light, about psychic self-defense. But if you train yourself correctly, and that's what I do with my patients, you can go to the upper astral plane where everything is beautiful, and you can access your higher self, which is how you raise your consciousness, and that's my introduction about consciousness raising. That's what I represent here. Okay, so let's roll the tape here. This is a woman who was able to access a time travel from the 36th century, as well as go into the 36th century, into a future life.
Michelle, into her future?
Michelle can go into the future, and she can actually access people from our future. We call these time travelers.
That'd be interesting to see.
Right. Michelle, I want you to focus in on communicating, establishing and recreating the communication with the time traveler that you had discussed before. Can you focus in on this time traveler?
Yes.
Can you focus in on what century he is from?
Thirty. 35, 30, I can't get the second number.
All right, so it looks like it's the 36th century?
Yes.
Okay, very good. And what does he, have you had much contact with him over the years?
Yes,
And how do you meet with him?
in my dreams.
All right, and has he given you any information about yourself or about the planet itself that you can share from this man from the future?
The consciousness level of the people of Mother Earth is raising.
Okay.
There are some people who will fight it, but they're meant to be there
Right.
to create a balance.
Okay. Now, she's describing this 36th century time traveler who's helping her in her own spiritual path, which is what they do, and I talk about this in my Time Travelers from Our Future book. And in her case, she can also go into a future life, too. If you'd like, I can quickly go into the 36th.
You have 30 seconds before we have to take a commercial to do that.
No pressure.
Moving into the 36th century lifetime, I'd like you to orient to that. Can you focus on what kind of work you're doing at this time now?
Spiritual psychologist.
And what is your purpose? What is your role? What do you do?
We help the people of Earth get used to living on other planets. They're upset.
So you're helping them both spiritually and psychologically adjust to living in a new planet.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break.
Get public. Okay. Traxa is, could we have
A quick break.
get public? You can cool it. Okay. That's me in a parallel universe doing the same talk. Okay. Okay, you can end it. Okay, we can have the lights on. Okay, what I'd like to do now is take a little break here, let you cogitate on the material. I'm going to be back in the product table there, and I'll be able to answer a few of your questions. Then we're going to come back, and I'm going to wrap up the talk, and then that'll be the end of it. And then those of you that are interested in more questions, I'll be here. I'll be staying here for a while, and you're interested in any of the books or CDs or anything else, I'll be more than happy to do that. So why don't we take about a 10-minute break and all teleport back to the back of the room where I will be
And I'll be able to answer your questions if you want to. If you have a few questions, whatever, I'll be more than happy to do that when we come back. And when we come back, I'll finish up and we'll have some more questions, and then we'll do that. Okay? So, take 10. Okay. All right. Now, I just want to cover a couple of points, and then I'll open this up for some questions, and then we will be finishing the basic talk, and I'll be back in the back of the room if you're interested in any of the final questions, or if you're interested in any materials. I'll be here for a while, so I'm not running off anywhere. People have asked me about some of the books that I have here, so I just want to make a couple of comments. The most relevant books to the talk here: Time Travels from Our Future, the Egypt book; the Exploring the Fifth Dimension, which deals with interdimensional travel and parallel universes; Custom Design Your Own Destiny book deals with switching parallel universes, your ideal path, things like that, like I've spoken with George about many times. The CD albums that are most relevant are, of course, the Time Travelers Training Program, which takes you into the fifth dimension, trains you to meet time travelers and ETs, and teleportation is part of that too. The Astral Voyaging Program is a basic form of out-of-body training. It's just basic out-of-body. You go in different dimensions, but it's not dealing with time travelers or the ET contact. The Hypnotic Time Travel is the album that deals with going into regression, progression, past lives, future lives, things like that. And there are other programs dealing with personal empowerment and a few other programs there too, but those are the big ones. Okay, one thing about teleportation. People always ask me about that. It's a popular topic. And I've talked about this a lot of times with George too. Well, I want to give you a demonstration of teleportation, okay? People say, "Doctor, can you do it?" All right, I want you to watch very carefully. Want to see it again? All right. Let me tell you a story, a true story about teleportation. Those of you that know my background know that I spent many years in Baltimore, Maryland. So I went to dental school. I practiced there for 13 years after dental school before I moved out here. Well, it was between Christmas and New Year's of 1985. And it was a Sunday, and I was watching some football games. The playoffs are on, and it was about 12 degrees in Baltimore. And I was freezing my time travelers off, okay? And me no likey cold weather, okay? So I said to myself, this is really stupid. Why aren't I baking my chest in Montego Bay, Jamaica? Okay, it was my favorite vacation spot. I should tell you that on Friday, 2 days earlier than that, a woman came to me. She was a local patient, and she was referring her cousin from Ohio who was coming in on Monday morning for a session. So she saw me on Friday afternoon. She goes, "Doctor, it's a great session, and have a nice weekend, and my cousin will be here on Monday, and she's looking forward to it." And, and I said, "Fine, okay." So now, and that's important. So she sees me on Friday. She's going to accompany with her, she's going to come in the session with her cousin to introduce her cousin to me. So it's Sunday, and I said, I got to get out of here. So I decided, look, I work with teleportation. I've discovered the technique, so why don't I just do that? So at that time, I had my miniature schnauzers, Karma the First and Phoenix the First, okay? And so I changed into my bathing suit. I have my little Zoris, my transistor radio, my beach blanket, my copper tone, and my sunglasses. And I go into the living room, and my dogs are cocking their head at me like, "What the hell is he doing now? This guy's weird enough as it is." But I fed them very nicely. Okay. So I lie on the couch, and I put on my tape. In those days, it was cassette tapes about teleportation. And the next thing I know, it's a beautiful, warm summer's day. I'm on the beach, and I see this kind of hot brunette, on a beach blanket in an isolated part of the beach. And she looked like a college student, so I figured, hey, what the hey, right? When in Rome. So I'm only a few feet away from her. So she turns around and she goes, "Where did you come from?" Now, if you've been on the beach, you can't run on the beach very fast, sand and everything. And she goes, "This is an isolated part of the beach, and you weren't here like a second ago." And I said, "Well, I moved kind of quickly. Do you mind if I put my towel down?" And she goes, "No, okay." So we're talking and chatting, and she went to some local university in the States. And so we go swimming, we're having a good old time. And she says, "Well, it's getting late and I've got to go here. Or how long are you going to be in town?" And I said, "Well, my flight leaves kind of soon today, so." And she says, "Well, if your plans change, I'll be back here, tomorrow, same time." And I said, "Okay." So the next thing I know, I'm back in my living room, and my dogs are coming up to me and licking me like they haven't seen me in a year. And I'm saying to myself, so people say, "Oh, doctor, what was that? A out-of-body experience? Oh, by the way, my bathing suit was wet
okay? So the comment was that a wet dream? Okay, all right. Okay, I have done everything humanly possible with hypnosis. Not only can you not have a wet bathing suit, my sneakers had sand in it, and when I went to the full-length mirror in my living room, I had a suntan. You can't do that with hypnosis. Folks, that's teleportation. I was in Montego Bay, Jamaica for a few hours at the end of December in 1985. Now, I've trained people to do this. It's not easy to do. It's not predictable. It's a very rare instance, but it happens. It's happened to me several times, and of course, several of my patients too. That's the last title on the Time Travelers Training Program. So if you want to teleport, that's how to do it. But you got to do it in order. You can't just buy a CD title on teleportation. It won't work. You need the whole program. Okay, a couple of things before I open up some questions about technology for the future. People have asked me this. I mentioned Tatos, the man who discovered time travel. In the future, they will devote a amusement park to him called the Land of Tatos. It's an anti-gravity amusement park. It floats about 3,000 feet above the earth. And so people, when they go to this park, in case they're stupid enough to fall off the edge, they have an electric kind of like, force field, so you can't do that. And the purpose of the park, there's no rides on there like you would have today in an amusement park. What you do is you go backwards in time. You take the family to the Renaissance for the weekend, or whatever. Time travel, okay? Land of Tatos. My favorite device, and a lot of women like this, is called the Alpha Syncolarium. This is a device that sends light and energy through your body, building up your DHEA production so that the average 35th century citizen lives to be between 500 and 900 years young. Okay? Interesting. Then there's what I call the Mind Witch machine, which is it's a food simulator. It looks like a microwave, except you think of the proverbial chicken sandwich and your thoughts go through the microwave. It's like a microwave. It's not a microwave, actually. And it creates this artificial synthetic food, which is very healthy. You can eat as much as you want. You don't gain weight, but you get all the nutrition. And that's why if you notice people in the future, like Traxa and others, they're all thin. You don't have obesity or any type 2 diabetes. None of those exist in the future at all. They're gone. Within the next 100 years, 150 years, they're all absolutely gone. So it's kind of fun. You know me, I'm Dr. Positive. The future is going to be very bright, folks, once we get through the next 50 years. Then there's an information pill. So all the news that's fit to swallow, you take a pill in the morning and everything that's been around, you're updated. Medically, politics, whatever, okay? What I like also is the Holographic Relaxation Center. This is a equivalent to the holodeck on Star Trek. If you want to actually say, gee, I'd like to be in a safari right now, you take your little device, you go into your living room, and you create the environment of wherever you want to be. Objects can be shrunk in size for storage and enlarged by certain devices in the future. And in the future, you have no psychosis at all. There's no poverty. There's no fascism. Everything is democratic. The population of the world is less than 1 billion people, not because of wars or disease, but because people don't procreate like we do today. Most of the population of this planet is due to third world countries having 9 kids, not for the Western civilization, okay? So my point is that it's a very positive future. So times are a little rough, people today. It's a karmic test. We'll get through it. We always do. But the future is going to be extremely bright, not just medically and technologically, but in general. People are spiritual, they're cool, they're fun, and the tennis game is great if you like to play tennis. So.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Goldberg.